Oh, it was just unbelievable. It was a bit of a sort of strange reality check, really. We were just sort of thinking, well, why get us to build the car?
So are you smug or embarrassed now?
I don't think I was necessarily smug, but definitely not embarrassed.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good shell. We've obviously blasted the shell now. And it's come out all right. There's a bit more damage than I'd hoped. The rear quarter down there is pretty badly biffed, and the same on the other side. The A-post on that side's taken a fair old hit, and the sort of lower part of the cell. I think basically somebody's sort of had a bit of a scrape right down the near side of the car, which has damaged the door, the A-post and the quarter panel. This quarter panel's not as bad as the other one. And then front and back have got accident damage as well, albeit quite minor. Just around here, it's obviously had a bit of a hit at the front. Not quite sure what it's hit, but it's been hit and then bashed out. You can see there's a bit of a crease on the inner wing in there. You can see it's creased the inner wing where it's been pushed back and then hammered forward again. It's lived a bit of a life, but on the plus side, there's not any more rust than we thought. It's really, there's the rust in the floor pans. There's a little bit here, which we kind of knew was going to be there because they just always go there. This is the intake for the ventilation system, and rain goes down here and it's supposed to flow out of this hole here. But given that there's like a 8mm distance between the hole and the bottom of there, of course that means there's always that much water just sitting in there, unless it evaporates out. So yeah, that was rusty, but no big surprise. So on the whole, yeah, not hugely embarrassed, not going around pointing at everyone saying, look how good it is, because there's a little bit more accident damage than we would have liked. But in reality, none of that damage is meaning any more extensive work than we expected. So from a rust point of view, we couldn't really hope for a better car. We're going to definitely be replacing the quarter panels. We weren't totally decided on that originally. We were thinking, well, they might be able to leave them original, but with the damage that's on them and the fact that it would be nice to pull the arch lip apart, there's not really any rust. Anybody would think those arches are perfect, but there's just the risk with a spot welded seam like that is on a car of this age. You just can't help but think something's lurking in there. So we're going to take the quarters off. A, so we can sort the damage out better, B, so we can clean out that arch lip there, and also we're going to be tubbing the arches for wider wheels. The front wings are definitely going to be replaced. The originals weren't perfect, but there are really good quality new panels available, so it just makes sense to do those. This panel you can buy, so that's just going to be a case of replacing that. That's going to be a standard panel. We're not modifying that in any way. The front and rear panels, just because of the damage, there's obviously a fair bit of accident damage front and back, so we're just going to replace those panels completely. Again, they're available new. And they're really good quality. That's something that surprised us, and something that made the decision easy on the quarters was that we got one new quarter panel because we thought, oh, we'll buy one and just make sure it's all right. And we were actually remarkably impressed at the quality of the panel. So we're ordering both of them because they're just such crisp pressings. You know, they really do look good. We've had horror stories on other cars where you're like, oh yeah, you can get all the panels, and then you get them here and you might as well not have them because they're that bad. They don't represent the original panel in any way. The doors, bonnet and boot, we've had a discussion about. The door on that side where the accident damage was definitely needed reskinning, and the frame was quite badly damaged as well. It kind of looked like somebody had been hammering the door straight to get rid of the accident damage and damaged all the inner frame as well. So we were definitely going to need repairs on that door and a complete door skin. The door skin on this one is pretty good, but it wouldn't go amiss to replace as well. So we spoke to Gordon about that, based on the fact you can get alloy skins, which are obviously a lot lighter. And we know he's a bit of a fan of lightweight cars. so we had a bit of a chat. What we've decided to do is go with a carbon boot lid, mainly on the basis that the alloy one was vastly more expensive and doesn't really bring any more to the party than having a carbon fibre one. With the doors though, with you skinning a carbon fibre skin over a steel frame, you tend to find that you can't join it in. Normally with an alloy skin, it goes over the frame and wraps around the edge of the frame, exactly the way the originals did. But with a carbon skin, you've got to literally bond it on and leave like an open edge on there, which, you know, you can seal it or whatever you want to do, but the different expansion rates of the steel and the carbon are going to mean that eventually that's going to crack down that edge. So we're going aluminium door skins so they can be wrapped around in the original way. Carbon fibre bonnet, because it's a complete carbon fibre piece with the reinforcer and everything. It's not just the skin, and the same with the boot lid. So they're completely carbon fibre in the shell and the skin. So hopefully that's going to shed a fair amount of weight out of it. We're quite keen to see the eventual weight of the car, because I don't know, we're thinking it can probably be not far off the same weight as these were as standard, because we'll be losing weight in some places like the panels, but gaining it in other places like, you know, some of the running gear is probably going to be heavier than original. The only one thing which we do need to check, the accident damage on that side, it's biffed that door hinge pillar in a bit, and we want to check that alignment's still good on there, which is one of the reasons it's lying on this jig bed at the minute. It's just on some blocks, but it will be properly attached to that jig, and that gives us a solid datum point for all the modification work we're going to do, but also means we can check for alignment, so we can check the positioning of that sill and the door hinge pillars and any critical mounting points on that side, and just basically make sure the shell initially is as Ford intended it to be before we then start ripping it apart. but we still need to know that everything's in the right place now, and then with the shell mounted, you know, squarely and centrally on the jig, that then means we can make accurate measurements for all the mounting points of the things that we're going to modify on it. While we've got the shell bare metal as well as doing the rust repair, a really critical point at this stage is what we call a dry build. So we're going to put all of the revised mechanicals in it and do all the metalwork relating to that. So, you know, different mounting points. There's obviously the bigger transmission tunnel. There's going to be quite a bit of work to do at the back for the independent suspension. So at the moment, Nat's sort of busy working away, working out what parts we're going to be using and doing the suspension design on the back.
Well, we've ordered quite a few bits so far. One of the benefits, I guess, with the Escort is pretty much everything's available. Most of the parts off the shelf, pretty reasonably priced, and there are plenty of bits to choose from. The front end setup's pretty straightforward. We've got front uprights and separate strut bodies, which means we've got a nice built-in camber adjustment on here. The lower arms, again, nicely made. There's no point us making them. We can buy them and they do exactly what we want. So that's all off-the-shelf parts. We've made a couple of very small detail changes because it's really a competition kind of aimed kit. We've kind of gone with bushes in a couple of places where originally it would have had rose joints just to keep a bit of compliance. The cross member is what's sort of known in Ford circles as a World Cup cross member, just because it uses a fully enclosed type of bush for the engine mounting, which is what we want to use. Quick rack, 2.4 turns lock to lock, just nice without being oversensitive for road use. Again, the front hubs, we haven't got them out here, but the front hubs is aluminium hubs, which go onto these Rix uprights, and then an AP Racing brake setup. That's all well proven in competition. We've used them before, there's no problems. And then the wheel that sits over all that, it seems a bit premature to be thinking about wheels, but you kind of have to design quite a bit of the car around the wheel. Obviously, there's nothing particularly crazy about this size of fitment. They're going to look perfect on the car. They're exactly in keeping with the image we want. And that Gordon wants, but we do have to bear in mind the wheel diameter for ride height, for obvious reasons, and the wheel width and offset in terms of arch clearances and the tubs on the back, because we are altering the wheel clearance in the shell on the back. We're putting a tub in, so that is quite important. And then that kind of leads me on to the rear suspension, in that it's very important to set the axle centre lines. And going back, Cal was talking about putting the car on the jig earlier, and going back to it's critical setting the axle centre lines right at the beginning of the process, because we have to design the rear suspension around that axle centre line. So we've got to determine a ride height, fix that, and then work out the axle centre line in the rear of the shell. And that gives us the height we need to basically fit all the bits of metal into the shell at. Now, I've got some reasonable ideas on how to do that, but I need the dimension before I can start to draw all the parts up. All the parts are kind of needed fairly early on to measure some of them, because whilst everybody knows what an Escort crossmember looks like, not everybody knows the height between the track control arm centre line and the chassis rail height. And likewise for the rear end, I need to know various dimensions on there, which I've got to measure off the shell, and then make sure that I'm getting my axle centre lines correct front to rear on the shell, and various other sort of complicated bits to do with where I actually attach the suspension to the car. This would be how we approach most builds. They just differ in their complication level. Yeah, the front end on this is more straightforward than normal. The rear end is more complicated than normal. It kind of straddles the average. The rear end we've kind of led Gordon to an independent rear end. He didn't originally want an independent rear end. He originally wanted a live axle setup. He's got a Mark 1 Cortina, which he loves driving, loves the driving dynamics of it. Very simple car, and I can concur with that approach. Simple car, drives beautifully. Just keep it simple is the way. But at the same time, our roads seem, certainly in this area, and I didn't see any noticeable difference in the London area either, seem to be getting steadily worse in condition. And live axle's very good on a nice smooth surface. It's great on track, it's great on lovely smooth roads, it's brilliant. It's very predictable, very nice to drive. On rough roads, you do have to pay a lot more attention to damping. You need to spend a lot more money on dampers and go into a lot more depth on the damping, which is fine, we could do that, but you're still working around a big lump of an axle flapping up and down under the car, and it's just not really ideal for rough road use when you don't really want your spine shaking too much and you're not going flat out. It's quite nice to have that bit more compliance in the suspension. So it all added up to me to go independent rear end, but then it was a case of, well, design the independent rear end without completely losing the sort of ethos of an Escort. And that's where we come to that rather rusty item there, which is a scrapyard part sort of that I've got a hold of for doing a mock-up, so that I could get measurements from it to put them onto the little bit of suspension design software. It's actually Land Rover Freelander 1 upright, which uses the same basic setup as what I want to use on the back of the Escort, or will be using on the back of the Escort, which is a McPherson strut, 2 transverse links and a single trailing link to locate the upright, with nice big wheel bearings, sensible room for a drive shaft, sensible place to locate brakes. It's all quite a nice setup actually. In theory, works out quite well, and I've kind of stuck the dimensions of the upright and the dimensions of various parts of the structural bits of the shell, and where I know I roughly want to put components into the little suspension design calculator, and it all looks okay, it all looks doable. Yeah, with this very handy little bit of software, I can put in a chassis width, track control arm length, basically fit all the parts into a known track width. I put all the sort of fixed dimensions in, and then I can play with basically where we're going to attach the various parts to the body shell. I can play with that to try and optimise the sort of critical factors. There's a bit of suspense over the fact that I need to make this drive nicely. Now, nicely is a broad term. One of the bits I probably missed out earlier, which I meant to mention, was the fact that at the back of my mind, I know from the conversation that Gordon's very happy with the driving characteristics of the Mark 1 Cortina, which is live axle. But equally, one of his more or less daily driving cars is Lotus Elan. And the Lotus Elan uses a more or less a Chapman strut, but it's more or less a McPherson strut design on the back. And he loves the driving characteristics of that as well. And that is much closer to this type of setup. It almost is this setup on the Elan. So I've got that, which is a little bit of a comfort factor, but I've still got that concern that if I make this not drive at all like a live axle Cortina, then he may not be entirely happy. Oh, it was just unbelievable. It was a bit of a sort of strange reality check, really. We were just sort of thinking, well, why get us to build the car? But I suppose because that's the kind of thing we do. I don't think I can think of anybody else I'd rather be building a car for. I'm sure I'm missing somebody out there, but no, it was a surprise and a very good one. Certainly, I don't think I'll get many surprises in life quite like that. The element, in my head, there's the element of, yeah, obviously, it's got to impress from a driving dynamics point of view. The only way we'll know that is when he drives it. From a comfort factor point of view, the original remit was for a live axle car. I twisted Gordon's arm into going independent rear end, but as I say, he does like the Lotus Elan as well. I feel slightly safer than I did before I realised he had two Elan S2s in his collection. But still a little bit nervous because I've still twisted his arm away from the general direction he wanted to go in. So yeah, the onus is on me to make it work.
Well, the shell was just a bag of shit, typical, you know, cow goes out blindfolded. Brought it back, rocked up here, looked like it'd been found in a swamp.
I'll take it, it's a mixer.
Jason made me say this, just for the record.